My name is Caroline Moore, and I never thought I'd walk into my husband's office holding flowers, just to hear him announce his new wife's pregnancy. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I made one call instead, and everything changed. Stay with me. This story isn't about cheating. It's about what happens after. Tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you believe silence can be power. I walked into Jason's office building with flowers sweating through the paper, and my daughter's card tucked against my chest like a secret. It was supposed to be quick. A surprise. 10 years together deserve something small and human in the middle of a workday. I told the receptionist his assistant said I could come up. She smiled like she knew something I didn't. The elevator doors opened to applause. Not polite clapping. Loud, confident applause that rolls from the front of a room when someone says something bold and expects praise for it. I stepped out and followed the sound, heels tapping too clearly on the polished floor. A glass-walled conference room was packed. Executives, project leads, people I'd seen at holiday parties and company picnics. A banner I'd never seen before hung behind the podium. Jason stood there in a tailored jacket, hands resting on the edge of the lectern like he owned the future. He was smiling in that way he practiced in mirrors, the one that made investors feel safe. I stopped at the back, half hidden by the door, my arm already aching from holding the flowers too tightly. He cleared his throat. The room quieted. "I want to thank everyone for the support this quarter," he said, warm and measured. "We've grown faster than expected, and that's because of all of you." More applause. He waited for it to fade. He glanced down at his notes, then looked up again, eyes shining. "And before we wrap, there's something personal I want to share," he said. "Something that makes this moment even more meaningful for me." I felt a strange pull in my stomach, like gravity had shifted. Jason smiled wider. "My wife and I are expecting a baby." The word hit the room first. Wife. Cheers erupted. Laughter. Someone whistled. A woman near the front clasped her hands and said, "Oh my God." Jason lifted a hand, laughing modestly, and then he did something I wasn't ready for. He stepped aside and gestured. A woman stood up from the front row. She was younger than me, not dramatically, just enough that it registered. She wore a cream dress that curved around a stomach that was already unmistakably pregnant. Her hand went to her belly automatically, protective, practiced. Jason took her hand like it was muscle memory. "This is—" He paused, smiling at her. "This is my wife." I heard my own breath for the first time. A thin, sharp sound that didn't belong to me. She leaned into him. He squeezed her fingers. Cameras came out. Someone snapped a photo. Someone else laughed and said, "Second trimester already, huh?" Jason nodded. "Yeah. We wanted to wait until things were stable." Stable. The word pressed against my chest like a weight. My flowers slipped in my hand. One stem snapped cleanly, the sound loud in my ears even though no one else noticed. The card slid a little, my daughter's crooked handwriting peeking out. I shoved it back without looking. Jason's eyes moved, scanning the room, basking in it. And then they landed on me. It was a flicker, a glitch. His smile faltered for half a second, the way a screen freezes before correcting itself. He swallowed. The woman beside him followed his gaze. Her eyes met mine. I saw recognition form, not of me, but of something wrong. A calculation. Then she looked away. Jason recovered fast. He always did. "Thank you," he said into the room, voice steady again. "Really, this team is family to us." Family. Someone near the door shifted, blocking me partially. The applause rose again, louder this time, and I realized no one was looking at me anymore. I was just another silhouette at the back. Another person clapping. I didn't clap. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't do anything dramatic that would make this easier to explain later. I stood there long enough to watch him kiss her temple. Long enough to watch her smile for the cameras. Long enough to understand that this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was practiced. This had been planned. I turned and walked out. The hallway felt longer than it had seconds ago. The applause muffled behind glass, like a party underwater. My heels sounded too loud again. I passed people I knew. People who had been in my house, who had eaten food I cooked, who had asked about my daughter. No one stopped me. No one said my name. The elevator doors closed, and my reflection stared back at me from the brushed metal. My face looked calm. Pale, maybe, but calm. I watched the numbers descend and felt something inside me go quiet, like a switch had been flipped. Outside, the sun was too bright. Cars moved like nothing had happened. I got into my car and shut the door, and that's when my hands started shaking. Not violently, just enough that I noticed. My phone was already in my hand before I thought about it. Muscle memory. 10 years of shared life collapsed into a single decision. I didn't call Jason. I didn't call my sister or my best friend or anyone who would tell me to breathe. I called someone else. The line rang once, twice. "Hello?" A man answered, professional, alert. "It's Caroline Moore," I said. My voice sounded steady, like it belonged to someone else. "I need to secure my finances, immediately." There was a pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes," I said. I watched the building through the windshield, the glass catching the light. Somewhere inside, Jason was still smiling. "But I won't be if I wait." "Okay," he said. "Tell me what's happening." I didn't tell him everything. I didn't need to. I gave him enough. Marriage, joint accounts, business involvement, a public declaration that erased me. He listened. When I finished, he didn't gasp or interrupt or tell me to calm down. He said, "We need to move fast." "I know," I said. I ended the call and sat there for a moment, hands finally still. I placed the flowers on the passenger seat. The card slid out again. I picked it up and read my daughter's message for the first time. "Happy anniversary, Mommy and Daddy. I love you forever." I folded it carefully and put it in my bag. Then I started the car. I didn't know exactly how this would end yet. I didn't have a script or a speech or a plan written down. But as I pulled away from the curb, one thing settled into place with absolute clarity. Jason had announced a new life in public. I would end his in the same way, and I would not miss. Before that day, I would have told you my marriage was solid. Not perfect, but solid in the way you believe in something because it's been standing for a long time. Jason and I met in our late 20s, both exhausted, both ambitious, both convinced we'd finally found someone who understood the cost of wanting more. Back then, I had the better job. I was the one with a steady salary, health insurance, a retirement plan. Jason had ideas, big ones, and the kind of confidence that made people want to invest in him before there was anything tangible to show. When he decided to leave his firm and start his own company, it wasn't a debate. We talked numbers. We talked timelines. We talked risk. And then I said yes. I stepped back so he could step forward. When our daughter was born, that choice became permanent. We agreed I'd take the flexible role, handle school pickups, pediatrician appointments, late-night fevers. Jason traveled. Jason pitched. Jason stayed out late. We told ourselves this was temporary, that once the company stabilized, things would rebalance. They never did. The first warning signs were small enough to excuse. A new password on his phone, a sudden preference for working late at the office instead of from home. His phone face down on the table, always. He stopped asking my opinion on business decisions, even though my inheritance had quietly gone into early operating costs. I noticed, but I didn't confront him. We were tired. We were busy. We had a child. I told myself this was what long marriages looked like. There were moments I couldn't explain away. A calendar invite that popped up on our shared tablet, quickly deleted. A woman's blazer left in the back of his car that wasn't my size. His irritation when I asked where he'd been, sharp, disproportionate, like I'd accused him of something instead of asked a question. Once, at a company event, A woman I didn't recognize looked at me too long when I introduced myself as Jason's wife. Her smile tightened, just slightly. I remember thinking it was strange. I didn't think it was important. Looking back, it was all important. The financial imbalance grew quietly. Jason handled most of the accounts. It made sense, he said, because his income fluctuated and the company needed flexibility. I trusted him. I had no reason not to. I signed where he told me to sign, skimmed documents instead of reading them closely, believed that transparency would come later. It never did. The day after the announcement, I didn't cry. I cleaned the kitchen. I packed my daughter's lunch. I drove her to school and kissed her forehead like nothing had shifted beneath our feet. It wasn't until I was alone again that the memories started stacking on top of each other, rearranging themselves into something I couldn't ignore. I drove to my sister's house without calling first. She took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. She made coffee. She sat across from me at her kitchen table and waited. When I finally told her what had happened, she didn't look surprised. "I was hoping I was wrong," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. Wrong about what? She hesitated, then reached for her phone. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you." She showed me messages. Not explicit. Not incriminating in the way people expect. Just familiar, comfortable, months' worth of them, plans that didn't include me. References to trips Jason had claimed were work-related. A picture of him holding a drink I'd never seen before, standing too close to the same woman from the conference room. He introduced her as his partner at a fundraiser last year, my sister said. Not business partner. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because every time I tried to bring up concerns, you defended him," she said gently. "And I didn't want to be wrong." She wasn't wrong. The final confirmation came from my daughter that night, without her realizing what she was doing. We were sitting on her bed, reading, when she asked a question so casually, it almost passed unnoticed. "Mom," she said, "why does Daddy have 2 houses?" My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "Sometimes he says he's staying at the other one, the one near the park. He said it's for meetings." I closed the book. "How long has he been saying that?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Since before my birthday, the one with the big cake." That birthday had been 9 months ago. I kissed her goodnight and sat in my car afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing. There was no room left for doubt. No explanation that made this less real. Jason hadn't just cheated. He had built a second life and invited the world into it. And in doing so, he had underestimated the one person who knew every weakness he had, every risk he'd taken, every resource he'd ever leaned on. That night, as I went through old files and emails, pulling together pieces I should have protected long ago, I stopped thinking in terms of loss. I started thinking in terms of recovery. And I understood something with a calm certainty that surprised me. Everything Jason had used to elevate himself had passed through my hands first. And I was done pretending I didn't notice. The shift didn't happen in a speech or a mirror moment. It happened quietly, somewhere between midnight and dawn, while my daughter slept and the house finally stopped making noise. I sat at the dining table with my laptop open and a legal pad beside it. No tears, no spiraling, just lists, accounts, properties, insurance policies, business filings, names of people who owed Jason favors and people he'd quietly alienated along the way. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud and sloppy. This felt cleaner than that. I started with money. I logged into the joint accounts he assumed I never checked. I changed passwords, enabled alerts, froze transfers above a certain amount. It took less than 20 minutes. Trust makes people careless. Jason had trusted that I wouldn't look. Next came the call I'd already prepared myself to make. "Good morning," the attorney said. Same voice as the day before. Calm. Efficient. "I'm ready," I said. "I want everything locked down today." We moved fast. Emergency separation filing, temporary financial restraints, documentation requests for the business. He told me what to gather. I already had most of it. By sunrise, the ground had shifted. I packed methodically. Not clothes, documents, hard drives, backup drives. The folder labeled Miss that turned out to be anything but. I found contracts with my signature on them that had been altered later. Loan guarantees I'd forgotten about. Email threads where Jason called me overcautious while asking me to wire funds. I photographed everything. At 8, I took my daughter to school like normal. At 9, I met with a realtor recommended by my attorney. She walked through the house and didn't ask why I was moving so suddenly. She'd seen this before. At this price, she said, it won't sit. Good, I said. By noon, the house was listed. That was when Jason finally called. I watched his name light up my phone while I stood in the driveway, keys in my hand, sun warm on my face like it had no idea what was happening. I let it ring out. He texted next. Where are you? I didn't answer. Another call. Voicemail this time. Caroline, he said, breathless, the performance already slipping. We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding doesn't last 9 months. I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney and kept moving. At 2, I opened a new bank account in my name only. At 3, I rerouted my income streams. At 4, I scheduled a meeting with the school counselor to discuss custody logistics before Jason even realized custody was on the table. He showed up at the house just after 5. I saw his car from the kitchen window. He parked crooked like he'd rushed. He didn't knock. He let himself in the way he always had, like ownership was permanent. Caroline, he called, voice too loud. We need to talk. I stepped into the hallway. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask questions. You announced another woman as your wife, I said, and her pregnancy. In public. He ran a hand through his hair. It's not what it looked like. It looked like you replacing me, I said. Successfully. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I was going to tell you. When? I asked. Before or after the baby shower? His phone buzzed. He glanced at it without thinking. I smiled for the first time that day. Answer it, I said. She's probably worried. He looked up sharply. How do you— I know everything, I said, and I'm already done. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Let's slow this down. We can handle this privately. We're past private, I said. You decided that yesterday. That was when it hit him. Not emotionally, logistically. He noticed the empty shelves, the missing folders, the realtor's card on the counter. What did you do? He asked. I protected myself, I said, and our daughter. His face changed, not guilt, fear. My accounts aren't working, he said. I tried to move money this morning. I know, I said. You won't be moving anything for a while. He stared at me like I'd become someone else. You wouldn't do this, he said. I picked up my bag and walked past him. I already did. And as I pulled out of the driveway, watching him shrink in the rearview mirror, I understood something with absolute clarity. Jason had thought betrayal was the hard part. He had no idea what preparation looked like. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They rippled outward, quiet at first, then fast enough to knock him off balance. Jason started calling before sunrise the next morning. Not the confident, clipped calls he used to make when something went wrong at work. These were panicked. Missed calls stacked on my screen. Texts followed, losing coherence by the hour. The bank made a mistake. I can't access the business account. Call me now. This is serious. It was serious, just not for me. By mid-morning, his company noticed. Payroll transfers stalled. A vendor invoice bounced. The CFO emailed asking why approvals had been frozen. Jason blamed a system issue. That excuse lasted exactly one afternoon, because systems don't suddenly lock founders out. I heard about it through a mutual contact first. Someone who didn't realize I already knew everything. Jason's having a rough week, she said carefully. Something about legal complications. Legal complications. I liked the sound of that. The woman he'd stood beside at the podium learned quickly, too. Whatever story he'd sold her about stability cracked the moment the money stopped flowing. She called him repeatedly, according to a message he sent me later, frantic about medical bills and lease paperwork that suddenly weren't being paid. He told her to be patient. She told him patience didn't cover rent. At the grocery store, a woman I barely knew stopped me between the produce and the bread aisle. "I saw the announcement," she said, eyes wide. "I'm so sorry." Word traveled faster than Jason could contain it. The same people who had clapped now whispered. They replayed the scene in their heads and realized who had been standing at the back of the room. Someone shared the photo from the meeting online. Someone else tagged the wrong wife. The narrative shifted. Jason's parents called me that night. His mother cried. His father didn't. He asked questions, specific ones about the business, about the house, about whether this was salvageable. "It's already past that," I said. He went quiet. "He didn't think you'd do this," he said finally. "I know," I replied. Jason showed up at my sister's place 2 days later, unannounced, pacing her driveway like a man waiting for a verdict. She didn't let him in. She told him to leave. He didn't. "I just need to talk to her," he said, voice cracking. "You already talked," she said, in front of a room full of people. By the end of the week, his messages changed tone. First came anger, accusations, claims that I was overreacting, that I was trying to destroy him. Then came bargaining. "We can fix this. Think about our daughter. You're going too far." I didn't respond. The final message came late Sunday night, longer than the rest. "Please, just call me." I stared at it for a long moment, then locked my phone and set it face down, because the first consequences had already landed. His money was frozen. His story was unraveling. The woman he'd risked everything for was starting to panic. The people he relied on were watching from a distance instead of stepping in. And for the first time since that conference room, I felt something close to calm. Jason had taken his first real loss, and he finally understood that silence wasn't mercy. It was momentum. The second confrontation didn't happen by accident. It happened because Jason tried to get ahead of the damage. He filed an emergency motion claiming I'd overreacted and was endangering the business. He wanted the financial restraints lifted. He wanted access restored. He wanted a judge to believe this was a temporary marital dispute, not the collapse of a double life. The courthouse lobby was full that morning. Attorneys, clerks, people waiting on benches, scrolling their phones. A local business reporter stood near the elevators, notebook in hand. Jason had invited that attention, hoping to look composed, wronged, reasonable. He didn't expect me to show up. I arrived with my attorney, calm and early, dressed plainly. No sunglasses, no attempt to hide. When Jason saw me, his face changed the way it had in the conference room. Shock first, then calculation. She was there too. The woman from the announcement stood a few feet behind him, hand on her stomach, eyes scanning the room like she was realizing too late that this wasn't a celebration space. No cameras for her today. No applause. Jason stepped toward me. "We can talk before this," he said, lowering his voice. "There's no need to do this in front of everyone." I looked at him, really looked. The confidence he wore so easily had thinned. His suit hung differently on him now, like it belonged to a man who'd slept badly for weeks. "This is where you brought it," I said. "I'm just responding." The doors opened. We were called inside. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way movies make it. It was worse. It was precise. My attorney laid out timelines, dates, account freezes that aligned perfectly with the announcement, documentation showing my financial contributions to the business, evidence that Jason had misrepresented his marital status in professional settings. The judge listened. Jason interrupted once, twice. Each time, it worked against him. The woman beside him shifted in her chair, her confidence draining with every sentence that confirmed she wasn't protected by anything he'd promised. Then my attorney did something Jason hadn't prepared for. He read aloud a transcript from the company meeting. The exact words Jason had used. My wife and I are expecting a baby. He paused. Which wife? The room went quiet. The judge looked up. Jason's attorney didn't speak. I stood then. I hadn't planned to, but the moment demanded it. I didn't come here to fight publicly, I said, voice steady. I came here because my husband made a public decision to erase me. I'm just asking the court to acknowledge reality. Jason shook his head. That's not fair. I turned to him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. You introduced a future without me, I said. I'm finalizing a present without you. Someone in the back let out a breath. The reporter looked up. The judge ruled quickly. The restraint stayed. Jason's access remained limited. The case would proceed on my terms, not his. Outside the courtroom, the woman didn't follow him. She stood still while he walked ahead, then called his name. When he turned, she said something low and sharp. He reached for her arm. She pulled away. I didn't sign up for this, she said loudly enough for others to hear. You said you were divorced. She left alone. Jason stood there, exposed in a hallway full of witnesses who had just watched his story collapse in real time. The reporter stepped forward. Any comment? She asked. Jason looked at me, panic flickering. I offered one last line, calm and clear. Truth doesn't need protecting, I said. It just waits. By that afternoon, the quote was everywhere. And Jason had nothing left to hide behind. Jason didn't disappear after the hearing. He doubled down. 2 days later, a carefully worded post appeared on his company's page. He called it a personal clarification. He wrote about privacy, about misunderstandings, about how public narratives can distort private struggles. He never used my name. He never denied the pregnancy announcement. He framed himself as a man caught between 2 chapters of his life. The comments didn't go the way he expected. At first, they were cautious. People asked questions. Others defended him, repeating phrases he'd planted. Complex situations, ongoing separation, legal processes. But then someone posted a screenshot from a fundraiser months earlier, showing Jason with his arm around the pregnant woman, labeled partner, not business partner. Another comment followed, then another. Timelines started lining up. A former employee chimed in, anonymously at first, saying payroll delays weren't new, that vendors had been paid late while Jason leased luxury cars. Someone else mentioned that the temporary separation Jason referenced had never been disclosed internally. HR confirmed it. The tone shifted. By that evening, the post was shared outside the company page. A local business account reposted it with a single caption. Which wife? That phrase stuck. Jason tried to contain it. He disabled comments. He removed the post entirely. It was too late. Screenshots had already spread. People who had clapped at the announcement began quietly distancing themselves. Board members asked for internal reviews. Investors sent emails that didn't ask questions. They requested explanations. Then the receipts dropped. My attorney released a limited statement, exactly as planned. No emotion, no accusations. Just verified facts, dates of joint ownership, documentation of financial contributions, confirmation that Jason was legally married at the time of his announcement. It wasn't framed as revenge. It was framed as correction. A hashtag appeared that night. I didn't start it. I didn't need to. It grew on its own, attached to screenshots and quotes and that single line from the courthouse hallway. Jason's phone stopped ringing with support and started lighting up with silence. The woman he'd built his second life around posted something vague and emotional, talking about betrayal and misplaced trust. She never named him, but the timing did it for her. Comments flooded in, connecting dots she hadn't realized were public. She deleted her account the next morning. At the company, things unraveled quickly. An internal audit began. Not because of me, because once trust breaks publicly, institutions protect themselves first. Jason was placed on temporary leave while matters were reviewed. He told people it was voluntary. No one corrected the record. He called me that night, voice hoarse. I didn't answer. He sent a message instead. "This has gone too far. You're ruining me." I read it once and archived it, because what he didn't understand was that this wasn't escalation through chaos. It was escalation through clarity. Every move had been calculated to let the truth surface on its own terms. The more he tried to explain, the worse it looked. The more he framed himself as a victim, the more the public compared timelines and found gaps he couldn't fill. By the end of the week, his name had become shorthand for dishonesty in business circles. Invitations dried up. Calls stopped. His carefully curated reputation collapsed under the weight of consistency, the kind you can't fake. And still, I said nothing publicly beyond what was necessary. Silence, I learned, is terrifying to people who rely on narrative control. Jason had lost the story, and once that happens, everything else follows. By the time the legal process caught up to the scandal, Jason was already unraveling. Court doesn't care about intent or explanations. It cares about records, and records don't forget. The forensic accountant found the patterns in less than a week. Transfers routed through personal accounts, business expenses masking personal living costs. Funds redirected toward a residence I'd never seen, leased under an LLC he'd never mentioned. The second house near the park wasn't for meetings. It was for a life he thought I'd never trace back to him. The judge didn't raise his voice when the findings were presented. He didn't need to. He simply ordered the protections expanded. Joint assets were split under temporary orders that favored preservation, not comfort. Jason lost control of discretionary spending overnight. Credit lines were suspended. His access to company funds, already limited, was now supervised. Every move required approval. Every justification was documented. At home, the consequences reached our daughter in quieter ways. Jason missed a scheduled pickup, then another. He blamed traffic, then work, then nothing at all. The custody evaluator took notes. Patterns matter to people trained to see them. I didn't have to argue. The house sold quickly. The proceeds went into escrow pending final division. Jason tried to delay the sale, claiming emotional attachment. The court denied it. Emotional attachment doesn't outweigh financial misconduct. His parents came to see me in person a few days later. Not together, separately. His mother cried and apologized, over and over, for raising a son who thought he could live two lives without consequence. His father was quieter. He asked for documentation. I gave it to him. He read every page without interrupting. When he finished, he stood up, straightened his jacket, and said, "I won't protect him from this." He meant financially. He meant socially. He meant completely. The support Jason assumed would appear never did. His brother stopped returning calls. A cousin withdrew a promised loan. Friends who once called him brilliant suddenly remembered prior commitments. The safety net collapsed because it had always been conditional, and Jason had broken the condition. The woman he'd promised a future to tried to secure child support before the divorce was finalized. Her attorney quickly realized the same thing everyone else had. Jason's available resources were far smaller than he'd claimed. Whatever he'd sold her as stability had been built on borrowed ground. She moved out of the second house within a month. Jason didn't tell me where he went. I didn't ask. I heard through a third party that he was staying short-term with someone from work, then a hotel, then nowhere consistent at all. His car was repossessed quietly. His lease ended loudly. The final ruling on custody came without drama. Primary residence awarded to me. Jason granted limited, supervised time until further review. When the judge looked at him, there was no anger in his expression. Just conclusion. Jason walked out of that courtroom with a folder of obligations and no leverage left. I walked out with my daughter's hand in mine, the paperwork secured, the future narrowed to something manageable. Betrayal had cost him everything he thought was guaranteed, and it had given me something he never expected. Control. He asked to see me one last time through his attorney. Not a surprise visit, not a voicemail at midnight, a formal request, routed properly, careful with language. He said he needed closure. He said it was important. He said it would help him move forward. I agreed on one condition. We meet in a public place, during the day, for no more than 30 minutes. He accepted immediately. We met at a quiet cafe near the courthouse, the kind of place people choose when they want neutrality. Neutral colors, neutral music, neutral conversations humming in the background. I arrived first and chose a table near the window. When Jason walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight. Not the healthy kind. The frantic kind. His suit was clean but worn, the confidence that once held it together gone. He scanned the room like he expected to be turned away. When he saw me, relief crossed his face so fast it made my chest tighten. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I didn't think you would." "I said 30 minutes," I replied. "Let's not waste them." He nodded, hands clasped tightly in front of him. He didn't order anything. "I know you don't owe me this," he began, "but I needed you to hear me out." I said nothing. He swallowed. "I made mistakes. I won't pretend otherwise. But this, everything that happened, it got out of control. I never meant for it to go this far." I looked at him steadily. "You announced another woman as your wife, in public." His eyes dropped. "I was trapped." "No," I said. "You were comfortable." He flinched. "I built something wrong," he continued, voice cracking. "I didn't know how to stop it without blowing everything up." "So you blew up our life instead," I said, quietly, carefully, until you didn't have to look at me anymore. Tears gathered in his eyes. I felt nothing watching them. "I lost everything," he said. "My job, my reputation, my family. I don't even know where I'm going next." "That's not my problem," I said gently. He leaned forward. "Caroline, please. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to stop. The legal pressure, the financial restrictions, it's too much. You've made your point." I smiled then, small and calm. "This isn't a point. This is a consequence." He shook his head. "You're punishing me." "I'm protecting myself," I said. "There's a difference." He reached across the table without thinking, fingers brushing the edge of my sleeve. I pulled back immediately. "Don't," I said. His hand dropped. "I loved you," he whispered. I met his eyes. "You loved what I made possible." That landed harder than I expected. His breath hitched. "I can change," he said quickly. "I'll do anything. Counseling, mediation. We can start over." I leaned back in my chair. "Start over from where?" "From us," he said desperately. "There is no us," I replied. "You ended it when you decided I was disposable." Silence stretched between us. The cafe noise filled it easily. "I don't recognize you," he said finally. "That's because you never bothered to," I said. "You thought I'd stay quiet. You thought I'd protect you the way I always had." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think you were capable of this." "I know," I said. "That's why you lost." His eyes searched my face for anger, for bitterness, for something he could argue with. There was nothing there for him to grab. "What about our daughter?" he asked, voice breaking again. "She needs her father. She needs stability," I said. "And honesty. Right now that doesn't include you." He stared down at the table, shoulders slumping like gravity had finally caught up. "I ruined everything," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "You did." I checked my watch. "We're done." I stood. He didn't. "Caroline," he said quickly. "If there's ever—" "There won't be," I said. "This is your ending. Don't try to follow me into my beginning." He looked up one last time, eyes empty now, stripped of entitlement, stripped of hope. I turned and walked out without looking back. Outside, the air felt lighter, cleaner. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I felt finished. And that was more powerful than anything he'd ever taken from me. Time didn't rush back in after everything ended. It arrived slowly, in ordinary moments, the kind that don't announce themselves as milestones. Mornings became quieter. Nights became predictable. The noise Jason left behind faded into something distant, Like traffic, you stop noticing once you move far enough away. 6 months passed before I realized I'd stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming anymore. My daughter changed first. Children always do. She grew lighter, not in the careless way people mean, but in the way someone does when they no longer feel the need to monitor an adult's moods. She slept through the night again. Her grades improved. She stopped asking questions that carried worry inside them. Stability had a visible effect on her, and watching that was enough to tell me I'd done the right thing. Work came back into my life naturally, not as an escape, but as a return. I accepted a role that fit my schedule instead of consuming it. I used the skills I'd never actually lost: negotiation, analysis, restraint. I didn't rebuild loudly. I rebuilt correctly. The house we moved into was smaller, brighter. It held only what we needed. There were no locked doors, no unanswered calls, no sense that something important was happening somewhere else. When I sat at the kitchen table now, it was to help with homework or drink coffee while the sun came up, not to untangle someone else's mess. I heard about Jason occasionally, always through someone else. He took a temporary consulting job that ended quietly. He missed scheduled visits. Then he missed entire months. The woman he'd promised a future to moved out of state to be closer to her family. I didn't ask where. It didn't matter. When my daughter asked about him, I answered honestly, without bitterness. He made choices, I said. And those choices changed things. She accepted that. Children understand truth better than excuses. A year after the announcement, I walked past the building where it had happened. The banner was gone. The lobby looked the same. No one recognized me. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, not out of pain, but out of perspective. That woman I had been, standing in the back of a room holding flowers, felt familiar and distant at the same time. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt proud of her for leaving without begging to be acknowledged. The most surprising change wasn't confidence or success. It was quiet, the kind that doesn't need validation. I no longer explained myself to people who weren't listening. I no longer softened my needs to preserve someone else's comfort. I didn't rehearse conversations in my head, anticipating how to make myself easier to keep. Freedom, I learned, isn't dramatic. It's waking up without dread. It's making plans that don't require permission. It's knowing that no one else is quietly rewriting your life while you're busy being loyal. Jason became smaller in my memory as time went on. Not monstrous, not tragic, just irrelevant. The center he once occupied slowly emptied out, replaced by space I hadn't realized I was missing. One afternoon, my daughter and I sat on the porch, watching the light change. She leaned against me and said, "Mom, you're happier now." I didn't argue with her. "Yes," I said, "I am." The story didn't end with revenge. It ended with alignment, with the understanding that betrayal doesn't break you unless you try to survive it by staying small. Jason thought announcing a new life would erase me. Instead, it clarified everything. And the life I built afterward didn't need witnesses. It just needed me. Thank you for staying with my story until the end. If this hit close to home or made you see something differently, go ahead and click the hype button to show your support. I'd really love to hear your thoughts or your own experience in the comments below, because you're not alone in this. If you want more stories like this, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the like button so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next